Michael Jackson was in the middle of performing when his eyes locked onto one woman in the crowd. She wasn't crying. She wasn't screaming. She wasn't moving at all. She just stood there, frozen like a ghost, staring at him with an expression that made Michael's blood run cold. Then something happened that had never occurred in Michael's entire career. His voice cracked. He missed a note. He stumbled backward, as if he'd seen something from another world. The music continued, but Michael had stopped singing completely. He dropped the microphone, and it hit the stage with a deafening thud that echoed through the stadium speakers. Then he ran to the edge of the stage, his face drained of all color. Because what Michael saw in that woman's face was something he had been running from for 20 years. A mistake, a betrayal, a moment of cowardice that had destroyed an innocent life. And now, that life was standing right in front of him, staring at him with eyes that demanded answers. It was June 27, 1992, at Wembley Stadium in London. Michael Jackson was performing the Dangerous World Tour to a sold-out crowd of 72,000 people. The show had been absolutely electric from the opening number. The crowd was wild with energy, singing along to every song, screaming at every dance move. This was Michael at the peak of his powers, moving with that supernatural grace that had made him a legend. He was performing Billie Jean, completely in his element, at the part where he pointed out into the crowd, making eye contact with different fans, giving them their moment of connection with their idol. But then his eyes landed on someone who shattered everything. A woman, maybe in her late 30s, standing in the VIP section about 30 feet from the stage. She had dark hair pulled back severely from her face. She wore a white shirt that made her stand out from the crowd like a beacon. But it wasn't her appearance that stopped Michael cold. It was her absolute stillness. While 72,000 people around her screamed and danced and celebrated, she stood completely motionless, staring at Michael with an expression of such profound pain and accusation that it cut through everything else. Michael's body reacted before his mind could process what he was seeing. His throat constricted. His next note came out cracked and broken. His feet, which had been moving with precision just seconds before, stumbled. He actually lost his balance for a moment, something that never happened to Michael Jackson on stage. The band kept playing, but they were confused now, sensing something was terribly wrong. The crowd's energy began to shift from joy to concern. People in the front rows could see Michael's face, could see the shock and fear in his eyes. Michael walked to the very edge of the stage, his movements jerky and uncertain. His security team immediately tensed, moving closer, but Michael waved them back with a trembling hand. He was staring at the woman in white like she was a ghost he'd thought was buried forever. "You," Michael said into the microphone, his voice shaking. He pointed directly at the woman in the white shirt. "You." 72,000 people turned to look at where Michael was pointing. The woman didn't move. She just continued staring at Michael with that same devastating expression. Michael's hand was visibly shaking as he held the microphone. "Do I know you?" he asked, though something in his voice, something broken and afraid, suggested he already knew the answer, that he'd always known this moment would come someday. The woman finally moved. She nodded slowly, deliberately, and that single nod seemed to hit Michael like a physical blow. He actually took a step backward on the stage. "What's your name?" Michael asked, and his voice was barely above a whisper, forcing the sound engineers to boost his microphone. The woman opened her mouth to speak, but her voice was lost in the confused murmur of the crowd. Michael gestured frantically to his sound engineers. Within seconds, security was weaving through the crowd with a microphone, bringing it to the woman in white. The stadium fell into an eerie, suspended silence. Something was happening that nobody understood, but everyone could sense they were witnessing something that would change everything. This wasn't a concert anymore. This was something else entirely. The woman took the microphone with a steady hand. When she spoke, her voice was clear and strong, cutting through the silence like a blade. "My name is Rebecca Morrison," she said. "And 20 years ago, Michael, you destroyed my life." The words hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. 72,000 people held their breath, waiting for what would come next. Michael stood at the edge of the stage, frozen. His face showed shock, recognition, and something that looked like shame so deep it seemed to physically hurt him. "Rebecca," Michael whispered into his microphone, and the name seemed to cause him physical pain. His eyes filled with tears instantly. He had no idea that 20 years later, that same terrified girl he'd failed would stop his concert in front of 72,000 people. The story begins in 1972 in Gary, Indiana. Michael was 14 years old, and the Jackson 5 were at the height of their early fame. They were home for a rare few weeks between tour dates, and Michael, always different from his brothers, spent his time walking alone through the neighborhood where he'd grown up. One afternoon in late summer, Michael was walking near his old elementary school when he saw her. A girl, maybe 13, sitting alone on the school steps, crying silently with her face buried in her hands. Something about the loneliness of that scene made Michael stop. "Are you okay?" he asked gently. The girl looked up, and Michael saw that her face was bruised. Black eye, split lip. But more than the physical injuries, Michael saw something deeper in her eyes. A kind of hurt that went beyond bruises. "I'm fine," she said quickly, trying to hide her face. But Michael sat down on the steps next to her anyway. "I'm Michael. I know who you are," the girl replied. "Everyone knows who you are. You're Michael Jackson. What's your name?" "Rebecca. Rebecca Morrison." They sat in silence. Finally, Rebecca spoke. "My dad drinks. When he drinks, he gets angry. When he gets angry, he hits. Last night was really bad." Michael knew about angry fathers. His own father, Joe Jackson, had been violent throughout Michael's childhood. He understood exactly what Rebecca was going through. Over the next 2 weeks, before the Jackson 5 had to leave for tour, Michael met with Rebecca 3 more times. They would sit on those school steps and talk. Michael told her about his music, his dreams, his own struggles. Rebecca told him about her fear, her loneliness, her desperate hope for escape. On their last meeting, Rebecca had fresh bruises on her arms. "It's getting worse," she told Michael, her voice trembling. "Last night, he said he was going to kill me. I think he meant it, Michael. I think he's really going to kill me." Michael felt panic rising in his chest. "You need to tell someone. The police. A teacher." "I can't," Rebecca said, tears streaming down her face. "They'll put me in foster care, and everyone says that's worse. At least here I have a home." Michael made a decision in that moment. "I'm going to help you. I'm going to tell my mother. She'll know what to do. She'll make sure you're safe." Rebecca's face lit up with hope for the first time since Michael had met her. "Really? You promise?" "I promise," Michael said firmly. "I'm leaving for tour tomorrow, but I'll call my mom as soon as we get to the first city. I'll tell her everything. She'll come check on you. You're going to be okay, Rebecca? I promise." Rebecca hugged him tightly. "Thank you, Michael. You're the only person who's ever cared about what happens to me." The next day, the Jackson 5 left for a 3-month tour, and Michael, caught up in the whirlwind of performances and travel and his father's relentless demands, forgot to call his mother about Rebecca. At first, it was just because things were hectic. He told himself he'd call tomorrow. Then tomorrow became next week. Then next week became next month. And gradually, as time passed and the tour consumed everything, Michael pushed Rebecca Morrison to the back of his mind. He told himself she was probably fine. He told himself someone else had probably helped her. He told himself that one 14-year-old kid couldn't really make a difference anyway. And as she bounced from home to home, beaten and broken, Michael was becoming the biggest star on earth, unaware of the storm that would one day hit him live on stage. 3 months later, when the Jackson 5 returned to Gary, Michael was walking past that elementary school and thought about Rebecca. He felt a pang of guilt. He decided he would find her, apologize for not calling his mother, and make sure she was okay. But when Michael asked a neighbor about Rebecca Morrison, the woman's face went pale. "You didn't hear?" the woman said quietly. "Her father nearly killed her about 6 weeks ago. Beat her so badly, she was in the hospital for 3 weeks. They took her away, put her in foster care. That poor girl." Michael felt the world tilt beneath him. She wasn't dead, but somehow this felt almost worse. She was out there somewhere, alone, going through exactly what she'd been terrified of. And it was his fault. He had promised to help her. He had promised to tell his mother. He had promised she would be okay. And he had broken that promise. 2 days after Michael left for tour, Rebecca's father had come home drunk, worse than usual, and beaten her so badly she couldn't walk. She crawled to a neighbor's house, begging them to call the police. They put her in the hospital for 3 weeks. The whole time, she kept waiting, kept thinking Michael Jackson's mother is going to show up. Michael promised. He said he would help me. He promised. But nobody came. Nobody came because Michael never told anyone. He forgot about her. He moved on with his incredible, glittering life, and he forgot about the scared little girl he'd promised to save. When Rebecca got out of the hospital, they put her in foster care. And Rebecca had been right to be scared. It was worse. Much worse. She was moved from home to home. 6 different foster families in 3 years. In 2 of those homes, she was abused again. In another, she was neglected so badly, she ended up back in a hospital with malnutrition. She ran away when she was 16, choosing the streets over another foster home. For 2 years, she lived in alleys and shelters, doing things she would never be able to forget just to survive. She got addicted to drugs at 17, spent 5 years as an addict, barely human, barely alive. She tried to kill herself twice. She didn't know it then, but their unfinished story wasn't over. It was waiting for Wembley. But somehow, impossibly, Rebecca survived. At 22, something in her refused to die. She got into a treatment program. She got clean. It took 2 years of brutal work, of facing every demon she'd been running from, but she did it. And she went back to school, got her GED, went to college on scholarships and grants, studied social work because she knew exactly what kind of help she'd needed when she was 13, and she was determined to become that person for other children. By 30, Rebecca Morrison was a licensed social worker specializing in child abuse cases. She became the person she'd needed when she was a terrified 13-year-old girl sitting on school steps, waiting for someone to keep their promise. And for 7 years, Rebecca saved children. She pulled them out of abusive homes. She fought for them in court. She held them when they cried. She kept the promises that other people broke. But she never forgot Michael Jackson. Never forgot the boy who had promised to save her and then disappeared. As Michael became more and more famous, as his face appeared on every magazine and his music played everywhere, Rebecca felt the anger growing inside her. An anger that all her therapy couldn't quite heal. Finally, she decided she needed closure. She needed to look Michael in the face and tell him what his broken promise had cost her. She bought a ticket to his Wembley concert, got herself into the VIP section, and waited. Now, standing at Wembley Stadium with 72,000 people watching and a microphone in her hand, Rebecca Morrison was finally going to say everything she needed to say for 20 years. 2 days after you left for your tour, Rebecca continued, her voice shaking but determined, my father came home drunk and beat me so badly I couldn't walk. I crawled to a neighbor's house. They put me in the hospital for 3 weeks. Tears were streaming down Rebecca's face now, but she didn't stop. While I was there, I kept waiting. I kept thinking Michael Jackson's mother is going to show up any minute. Michael promised. He said he would help. He promised. Michael felt like he was going to collapse. Every word was a knife. But nobody came, Rebecca said. Nobody came because you never told anyone. You forgot about me. You moved on with your incredible life. And you forgot about the scared little girl whose life depended on you keeping your word. I'm sorry, Michael whispered into the microphone, but the words sounded hollow even to him. Rebecca, I'm so sorry. Sorry doesn't change what happened next, Rebecca said, her voice growing harder. They put me in foster care. 6 different homes in 3 years. In 2 of them, I was abused again. I ran away at 16. Lived on the streets for 2 years. Got addicted to drugs. Spent 5 years as an addict, wanting to die. The crowd was crying now. Thousands of people openly weeping as they listened to this woman's story unfold. I tried to kill myself twice, Michael. Twice I wanted to die because the one person who promised to help me broke that promise. And I learned that nobody in the world could be trusted. That hope was a lie. Michael was sobbing now, his face in his hands, his whole body shaking with the weight of what he'd done. "But here's what you need to know, Michael," Rebecca said, and her voice softened slightly. "I survived. I got clean 7 years ago. I got help. I went back to school. I became a social worker. Do you know what I do now?" Michael looked up at her, tears streaming down his face, waiting. "I save children," Rebecca said. "Children just like I was. Children who are being abused and have nobody to help them. Children who need someone to keep their promises. I became the person I needed you to be. The person you said you would be, but weren't." Rebecca took a deep breath, and the stadium held its breath with her. "I came here tonight because I needed you to see me. I needed to look you in the face and tell you what your broken promise cost me. I needed you to know that your actions have consequences, that you can't just promise to help someone and then forget about them when it becomes inconvenient." The stadium was completely silent except for the sound of thousands of people crying. Michael stood up slowly. He walked to the very edge of the stage, as close to Rebecca as he could get without falling off. "You're right," Michael said, his voice raw and broken. "You're absolutely right about everything. I was 14 and scared and overwhelmed, but that's not an excuse. That's never an excuse. I made you a promise and I broke it." Michael paused, his whole body trembling. "I promised you safety, and you paid for my silence with 20 years of pain. That's on me. That's my failure. My cowardice. My sin." The word sin hung in the air, heavy and true. "Rebecca, I can't undo what happened to you. I can't take back my broken promise or erase your suffering. But I can tell you that you are the strongest, most courageous person I have ever encountered. You took the worst thing that ever happened to you, and you turned it into your life's mission. You became a hero. You became everything I failed to be." Rebecca was crying now, too, the anger in her face mixing with something more complex. Pain and forgiveness and grief all tangled together. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," Michael continued. "I don't expect it, but I want you to know that I'm sorry. I'm truly, deeply sorry, and I want to help you now, even though it's 20 years too late." Michael turned to address the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Rebecca Morrison. She's a social worker who saves abused children. She does the work I should have done for her 20 years ago. And I'm going to make sure she has every resource she needs to save as many children as possible." The stadium erupted in applause, but Michael held up his hand. "I'm going to establish a foundation in your name, Rebecca. The Rebecca Morrison Child Advocacy Foundation. I'm funding it with $1 million to start, and I'm challenging everyone here and everyone watching to contribute. We're going to create a network of advocates who make sure no child ever has to wait for someone to keep their promise." Michael looked back at Rebecca. "But money isn't enough. What I really need to say is this. To everyone here tonight, if you ever make a promise to help someone, especially a child, you keep that promise. No matter how hard, no matter how inconvenient, you keep it, because broken promises destroy lives, and kept promises save them." Michael's voice broke. "Can you come up here? Please. I need to say this to you properly." Security helped Rebecca navigate through the crowd and onto the stage. When she reached Michael, they stood face to face for a long moment. The entire stadium suspended in breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Rebecca didn't speak. For 5 long seconds, she just stared at him, and those 5 seconds felt like an eternity. Every person in that stadium felt the weight of that silence. The tension of that moment balanced on a knife's edge between condemnation and forgiveness. "I broke my promise to you 20 years ago," Michael said quietly, though the microphone picked up every word. "But I'm making a new promise now, in front of all these people. I promise to spend the rest of my life making sure other children don't suffer like you did. I promise to use everything I have to create a world where children are protected and believed and saved." Then Michael did something that surprised everyone. He got down on his knees in front of Rebecca Morrison. "I'm asking for your forgiveness," Michael said from his knees. "Not because I deserve it. I don't. But because you deserve to be free from the burden of what I did. You deserve peace." Rebecca looked down at Michael Jackson, the king of pop, kneeling before her at Wembley Stadium in front of 72,000 people. The anger that had sustained her for 20 years began to crack, and underneath, it was something she hadn't expected to find. Relief. Release. Freedom. "Get up, Michael," she said softly. Michael stood, and Rebecca looked into his eyes for a long moment. "I forgive you," she said, and the words seemed to surprise even her. "Not because what you did was okay. It wasn't. It will never be okay. But because I've learned that holding on to anger only hurts me. I forgive you because I choose my freedom over your failure." Michael pulled Rebecca into an embrace, and both of them cried openly on that stage, while 72,000 people witnessed a moment of redemption that none of them would ever forget. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't clean, but it was real. It was human. It was broken people trying to find healing in the wreckage of the past. Michael didn't finish the concert that night. He couldn't. Instead, he spent the next hour on stage with Rebecca, talking about child abuse, about keeping promises, about how courage looks like facing your worst mistakes in front of the whole world. People called in donations right there in the stadium. By the end of the night, over $2 million had been pledged to the Rebecca Morrison Child Advocacy Foundation. But the impact went far beyond money. Within weeks, hundreds of people who witnessed that night came forward with their own stories of childhood abuse. People who had been silent for years found courage because they had seen Rebecca's courage. The Rebecca Morrison Child Advocacy Foundation launched 3 months later with Michael as its primary funder and Rebecca as its director. In its first year, the foundation helped over 3,000 children escape abusive situations and provided therapy for trauma survivors. Within 5 years, that number had grown to over 15,000 children. The foundation expanded internationally, trained thousands of social workers, and created emergency intervention programs that became models copied around the world. Michael Jackson kept his promise. For 17 years, until his death, he funded the foundation generously, raised awareness relentlessly, and used his platform to make sure children's voices were heard. He and Rebecca maintained a close relationship, working together on advocacy projects and supporting each other through the difficult work of child protection. When Michael Jackson died in 2009, Rebecca Morrison spoke at his memorial service. Her words were simple but profound. 20 years ago, Michael broke a promise that nearly destroyed me. But 17 years ago, at Wembley Stadium, he made a new promise. And he kept that promise every single day until the day he died. The Rebecca Morrison Child Advocacy Foundation has now helped over 75,000 children because Michael had the courage to face his failure and transform it into his most important work. Today, there's a plaque at Wembley Stadium that reads, "Here, a broken promise was transformed into a kept promise. Here, redemption became real." June 27th, 1992. Rebecca Morrison is now 63 years old and still serves as director of the foundation. The organization has helped over 150,000 children, trained over 10,000 social workers, and operates in 12 countries. All because Michael Jackson heard a woman's accusation and decided that facing his mistake was more important than protecting his image. The story of Michael Jackson and Rebecca Morrison teaches us that redemption isn't about erasing the past. It's about facing the past honestly and using that truth to build a better future. Michael couldn't change what he'd done, but he could change what he did next. And that choice, made in front of 72,000 witnesses, saved more lives than any song he ever sang. One broken promise. One kept promise. 150,000 children saved and counting. Michael faced his failure at Wembley Stadium. Now it's your turn. What promise will you keep today? If this story challenged you, if it made you examine the promises you've made and whether you've kept them, then subscribe to this channel right now and hit that notification bell. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that it's never too late to make things right. Leave a comment. What promise do you wish you could make right? What does redemption mean to you? Michael stopped his concert that night. He got on his knees. He asked for forgiveness. And then he spent 17 years keeping the promise he should have kept 20 years earlier. That's not perfection. That's courage. That's what real heroism looks like. Not avoiding mistakes, but facing them and transforming them into something that saves others. What promise are you going to keep today?